In January of 2019, a company that rents out office desks was valued at $47 billion. Not a tech company, not a company with patents or breakthrough software or anything you couldn't build with a lease and some furniture. Office space, $47 billion. 8 months later, that number was essentially zero. The founder was gone, and one of the most powerful investment firms on earth had quietly lost around $16 billion trying to keep the illusion alive. This is the story of how that happened. And more than that, it's the story of how an entire room full of the smartest people in finance looked directly at numbers that didn't add up and convinced themselves they did anyway. It starts with a man named Adam Neumann. Charismatic, magnetic, the kind of person who could walk into a room and leave with a check before anyone had time to ask the obvious questions. In 2010, he and a co-founder opened the very first WeWork location in a New York City neighborhood. The idea itself wasn't insane. Take a big building, split it into flexible office space, rent it out short-term to freelancers and small companies. That part actually made sense. What happened next didn't. Neumann didn't pitch WeWork as a real estate company. He pitched it as something bigger, a physical social network, a movement, a company that would elevate the world's consciousness, one shared desk at a time. And the wild part? People believed it. Not just believed it, poured money into it like it was the second coming of the internet. By January of 2019, the company was valued at $47 billion, driven overwhelmingly by one single investor, pushing harder than anyone else, SoftBank, and its vision fund, led by a man who had already put more than $10 billion into the company. But here's the number that should have stopped everyone in their tracks. That same year, the company's losses were well over $1.5 billion. On paper, WeWork wasn't a technology company disrupting an industry. It was a company signing long, expensive leases on buildings and hoping enough short-term renters would show up to cover the difference. That's it. That was the business. For years, nobody outside the company had to look closely at the real numbers because the company stayed private. Private companies don't have to show their homework. But in August of 2019, WeWork filed the paperwork to go public, and that single filing is where the entire fantasy collapsed in real time. Suddenly, anyone could see it, the massive losses, a governance structure that gave Neumann extraordinary personal control through supervoting shares and related party deals, including, remarkably, the company paying nearly $6 million to Neumann personally for the rights to a trademark he owned himself. Wall Street read that document, and in a matter of weeks, the $47 billion valuation evaporated to under $10 billion. Then further, the IPO was pulled entirely, and by the end of September 2019, under enormous pressure from his own board and investors, Neumann was forced out as CEO. Here's where the story gets genuinely infuriating for anyone who's ever had a normal job. Neumann didn't leave with nothing. He didn't even leave with a modest severance. He walked away with an exit package, reportedly worth up to $1.7 billion, money for his shares, a consulting fee, and credit to repay his own personal loans. Meanwhile, roughly 2,400 employees lost their jobs in the fallout that followed. The man whose decisions caused the collapse left richer than almost anyone in the story. The people who had nothing to do with those decisions lost their paychecks. SoftBank, the company's biggest backer, didn't get to walk away either. Having already sunk more than $10 billion in, they poured in billions more just to keep WeWork from collapsing entirely right then and there. Because at that point, letting it die meant admitting the entire $47 billion valuation had been fiction the whole time. It took 4 more years, but the ending everyone saw coming finally arrived anyway. In November of 2023, WeWork filed for bankruptcy, carrying close to $19 billion in debt. So what actually happened here? It wasn't a scam in the traditional sense. Nobody went to prison. No one was formally charged with fraud. What happened was something almost more unsettling. A system where investors were too financially exposed to admit they were wrong. A board too dazzled by charisma to challenge the numbers. And a culture where anyone who raised concerns quietly found themselves on the outside. Nobody lied exactly. They just all agreed, together, not to look too closely until a public filing finally forced them to. And that's really the lesson underneath all of it. The biggest financial disasters rarely start with someone hiding the truth. They start with a room full of smart people who have every incentive not to ask the obvious question out loud. If you want the next one of these breakdowns, subscribe and tell me in the comments which company's collapse you want covered next.